Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class on drawing eyes using the planes of the face. I'm your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and this class tonight is a little bit of a two-part class because next week we will be continuing on with drawing eyes, but we'll be drawing expressive eyes using the planes of the face, but in pen and ink. So tonight is a bit of a preliminary class that will help you with next week's class as well. But I didn't list them as part one and part two, but that's worth mentioning. If you want to continue drawing eyes with me next week, that's what we'll be doing. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to my tabletop view and go over supplies and we'll get started. So don't forget to tag your work with the hashtags Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes. And you can follow me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art. You can also tag me directly on Instagram with at Adrienne Hodge Art, or you can also tag at Learn with Michaels, as Chanel said, and you can also follow at Learn with Michaels as well to see upcoming classes that are happening. And I've also got some other classes on my own that you might check out while you're on my Instagram and my link tree. I've got a draw club on Saturday mornings. If you enjoy drawing with me and enjoy my teaching style, then you might check that out. And Chanel just dropped the link to my link tree in the chat. Okay, and then here's a few of my business cards that I like to show on screen. Here's some of my work using calligraphy ink, and in a couple of weeks, we'll be working with ink, watercolor, and gouache. We'll be talking about the differences between those three and painting a strawberry using all three, ink, gouache, and watercolor. Okay, but back to tonight's class. So you might have something that looks like this page by the end of the class tonight, although results will vary depending on where you are in your personal drawing journey there. But so I'm going to set this aside for a second and just go over the supplies that we're using here. I am going to be using some different supplies than what I had on the supply list that can all be purchased at Michael's. So I'm using the Artist Loft charcoal here. I've got an Artist Loft kneaded eraser and some blending stumps that come in a set with Artist Loft charcoal supplies there, drawing supplies. And then I've got this Artist Loft tone drawing pad here, so a little bit different than the paper that I used before for the example. And then the other thing that I'm using, which is might be slightly different depending on which set that you got. I have this set from the General's brand. It's the pastel chalk pencils. So we're going to be combining those with the charcoal pencils tonight. And I've got a few different colors here that I think will show up better on screen than that sanguine one, because even though I love drawing with the sanguine, I'm afraid that's maybe not going to show up on the screen as much as I'd like. So I'm going to use the Van Dyke brown from this kit. Really, you could just use the charcoal pencils for the entire class, but it's just kind of nice to use a color because that will help the distinction between the planes of the face and the blending that we're going to be doing with the value stand out there. So that's why I chose to use some color. So I had a purple one down here. I might still use that purple since that seems to show up pretty nicely on the Zoom screen, or maybe I'll use a dark blue since that might actually show up a little more. Let me pull out the violet here, maybe, yeah, this indigo blue would be good. Okay, so yeah, any chalk pastel pencils or charcoal pencils that you have should be good. We're definitely going to want a kneaded eraser and these blending stumps. If you don't have blending stumps, you could use tissue or a rolled up paper towel. And then we have these reference photos that I included on the supply list. And if you're watching this later on YouTube, if you just click underneath the information on the YouTube video where it says see more, There'll be a little 3 dots and more information under the video. If you click on that, it'll show you the full supply list and links to this PDF that I included for the class. So I've got 3 different photographs of some eyes here. I've got the true color photograph, and then I've got the black and white photos here where I messed with the contrast just a little bit. You can tell it's a little darker in the black and white photo than in the true to light photo there. And then I've got the inverted light. So that means all of the black is showing up white and all of the white is showing up black in the reversed inverted light. And that just helps us to see value shapes, which are going to be important. But the main thing that we're going to be focusing on today are the planes of the face. So let me just switch to, or open up to a piece of paper here and start talking about the planes of the face.
Adrienne, before you move on,
yeah,
we have a couple questions about supplies.
Okay.
Rhonda asked, I forgot charcoal paper. Would a smoother paper or textured paper work best for charcoal?
Yes, I am not actually using the charcoal paper tonight. I'm using this Artist Loft drawing paper that happens to be tan and gray, but that doesn't really make too big of a difference. So yeah, any smooth surface paper should be fine. The charcoal paper does have a little bit of an extra tooth to it that is nice, but any smooth drawing paper will be fine.
And then are you using any graphite pencils or just the
colored pencils?
Charcoal.
Yeah, these chalk pastel pencils and charcoal. I'm going to stick to just the chalk pastel pencils and charcoal. If you want to sketch first in pencil, then you're welcome to do that. I'm using the colored pencils because I feel like it's kind of a neat way to illustrate these contours of the planes of the face. And let me hold it up to the screen a little better there. All these contour lines, since the color kind of disappears a little bit under the black. That's why I wanted to do it that way. But if you want to use your pencil first, you go right ahead. I'm just opening up my kneaded eraser here. It's in a brand new package. And yeah, I realize some of us have a hard time drawing preliminary stuff with anything other than a pencil because maybe it feels a little more permanent or scary in some ways. And that's why I like to do it, because I think it's good to challenge ourselves a little bit and not get too bogged down in, needing everything to be perfect. So we're just embracing what happens, even if, and they are easy to erase. So if you have some colored pencils, you should be able to erase, even if you don't have these particular chalk pastel pencils. We've got the kneaded eraser. They're still erasable. So, and if you're going in with the charcoal only, that also is still erasable. With the kneaded eraser, you're just going to make sure that your first lines are sitting more on the surface of the paper and not embedded into the surface of the paper too much. So draw with whatever you feel comfortable with to get started here. So first I want to start with just sketching a circle. And this is something that we've done several times in these classes to talk about contour lines and rendering three-dimensional forms. Your circle does not have to be perfect. But we're just going to sketch a little circle here and then talk about how we can turn this circle into a three-dimensional sphere. So what we need are curved lines that curve all the way around the surface of the form. So think about like the letter C curving, and maybe you do like a little circle here over to the side, and then do some like elliptical, oval, or oval shapes around it. And that is starting to feel three-dimensional on one dimension, right? But then we want to illustrate all of the sides of this three-dimensional form. So if we curve C curves, the letter C all the way around, going a different direction, now that's really starting to feel more like a sphere. And then if we go again in another direction and continue to add these three-dimensional curves, well, now we've got something that feels really round and spherical, right? So the contour lines are the elevational lines that describe the three dimensions of a form. And the problem when a lot of people start to draw faces is that they think about the face as being something flat, and they don't think about the three dimensions of the face, and they're maybe referring back to their idea of what the face looks like. Is anybody else thinking that my image looks a little blurry so far? I saw that pop up in the chat.
I think it's the same issue where when you're drawing really light with graphite, Zoom has a hard time picking it up.
I think that's the case too. Yeah, I'm going to try to adjust my light a little bit and see if that makes a difference. But yeah, once I start to darken things, I don't think it'll show up as blurry. Zoom just has a hard time with light lines, as we've learned, which is why I wanted to use the colored chalk pastel pencils instead of graphite for this. Yeah, because if I put that under there, that doesn't look blurry. So I don't think it's an issue with the image so much as just the lighter lines. So as we start to go darker with the charcoal, things should be good. Okay, so just talking about three-dimensional forms here. So let's apply this to a cylinder. So if we're looking at a cylinder, we've got straight vertical lines on the vertical axis, right? But then we've got curved lines on the horizontal axis. And that's going to shift and change depending on our perspective. Like if I'm looking at a cylinder from above, then my eye level is up here. So I'm looking down. So it may be flat across the top of the cylinder. But then I see these curved lines curving down. If I were looking up at the cylinder, then those horizontal axis lines are going to curve the opposite way. And I'm going to have a curved line in an upward direction, and then still straight vertical lines, right? So now my eye level is coming from below. And then if my eye level was right in the middle of that cylinder, then I would see something like this. I would see a curved line. So, okay, if my eye level was right here, let me do the very cartoonish eye over here, then that means I might see a straight line in the center, but then lines curving up above that, and then lines curving down below that, right? So it all changes depending on our perspective. And a lot of people have a hard time seeing these elevational shifts and curves, particularly on the face, because we have a hard time getting away from our imagined idea of what these facial features look like. Like we're thinking about the eye more like that little symbol of an eye that I just drew, right? This almond shape, and then we've got a circle in the, but maybe it's eclipsed by the eyelid, and then we've got those eyelashes, and then we've got this, and we've got all these like hard lines, right? And then maybe you've got this action going on. Okay, but that's all very flat, and that's forcing these hard lines where the lines don't necessarily exist, and it's not really taking into account these contours. Okay, so we're going to be talking about contours and the planes of the face tonight, but we don't want to not talk about value either. So the value is the light and dark of something. So we've got a value scale from 0 to 10, and even with this blue pencil, I can sketch out a little value scale here from 0 to 10, 10 being the absolute dark or black if we were using that charcoal pencil. Let me just switch to the charcoal pencil. So if I got my soft charcoal pencil, I can get absolute black there for the 10 value. And then the 0 would be the absolute light, or maybe the blank paper. Because we're not going to be using any white today. So we're going to be using the blank paper as our 0 on that value scale. So when we go from a 10 and we go to like a 9, then we've got a little bit of light coming in from the paper. And then an 8 would be a little bit darker, or sorry, a little bit lighter, a little more light showing through on the paper, etc. Just pulling up on the pressure on that charcoal pencil. And then very little pressure for the light, or we could just leave it blank. And the nice thing about the charcoal pencils is we can use our blending stump to blend that out so that things can get even softer, or maybe we can even just use the blending stump with a little bit of light charcoal on it for these lighter values. So if we keep that in mind, this value scale from, oops, I went a little too dark right there. But if we go super light with our pressure and we maybe just use like the blending stump to drag the lighter values around, it's very easy to erase. And I should even be able to erase the darker stuff. It's just gonna stain the paper a little bit because charcoal is so dark, but we can still keep it super light. So if you're worried about erasing, just wanted to talk about the value scale a little bit there. And then applying that value scale from 0 to 10 to these images of these eyes, like just looking at the black and white ones for a second here, we can ask ourselves, around the edges of the eye on these eyes here, where do we see like a 10 on the value scale? Where does it go to absolute 10? Let's actually look at the true light. So, because I did turn up the contrast on that other one. So I would say I'm seeing, if we were in a class, I would call on y'all to answer me, but I'm just going to point it out. Where I'm seeing like an absolute 10 on the value scale would be right there in the center of the pupil. And then along the top lid where the eyelashes are, and a little bit in the eyebrows. But then like right here along, but the tear duct or on the bottom lid, I would put that at maybe a 2 on the value scale, or maybe a 3 or a 4 over here. And same thing with the whites of the eyes. I only see an absolute white light in the reflective light right here. I don't see absolute white in the quote unquote whites of the eyes. It's more of like a 2 or a 3 value, or maybe even a 4 in some places where it gets a little darker. And we can see the same thing in the second image where I see the absolute absence of shadow is only in a few places. And we can always exaggerate the light, but I just want to point out how we don't see a hard line all the way around the edges of the eyes. So we definitely want to keep in mind that the value tonight, as we're focusing on the planes of the face and just noting how we don't need these hard lines around the features of the face. And then if we look, I'm going to actually, let me try something real quick. Just realized this would be easier to illustrate if I drew on the photo. Except I'm not in the function where I can do that. So I'm just going to start drawing on my paper to illustrate this. All right, so let's go ahead and move on and start drawing one of these eyes using the planes of the face. I was thinking I might draw directly on that photo using my iPad real quick, but we're just gonna jump in. And yeah, nobody get too, worried about your drawings being perfect here with me. If you feel like you're not understanding what I'm talking about right away, just stick with me and hopefully we're gonna draw 3 different eyes together. So hopefully it'll make sense by the third one. We've got plenty of time. And just one moment, I need to grab my pencil sharpener that I left across the room. All right, so I'm going to stick with this blue pencil. Going to sharpen it a little bit since it seems to be showing up dark enough for now. And we're going to draw this first eye using just the planes of the face. So we're going to have something similar to this. And if you're like really lost and it doesn't make sense, just stick with me. We're going to draw another eye. And then with this one, we're going to just focus on the value so that we can really get a sense of what I'm talking about in reference to that value scale. And then we're going to combine them in this third drawing. So we're going to do both the planes of the face and the value on top of it. And hopefully we'll have a good understanding of how to draw eyes using the planes of the face. And if it's still hard, then you can watch the playback of this video later. You can, practice it a little more or ask questions, and I'll try to say it a different way. I always feel like there's always so many questions before I actually start doing the thing. Okay, so I'm starting out super light with my shapes here. So bear with me as I find the shapes that I'm looking for, but I'm looking for the shapes of the shadows. So the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light. So I'm not going to go in drawing those hard lines around the facial features because they don't exist. I'm going to be drawing these shapes of light, and the inverted light sometimes makes it easier to see those, although I'm noticing in the inverted one, it looks a little washed out here on the top eyes. So I'm going to look at the black and white version or maybe the true color version of it. But I'm looking for these value shapes. So rather than drawing the little crease in the eyelid, I'm looking for this little organic shape that I'm seeing right here next to it. So that's the shape that I just drew. And I'll darken it in just a bit as we go along. So if you're not quite seeing these shapes that I'm drawing yet, just do your best. And like I said, we're going to draw 3 different eyes, so it'll hopefully become illuminated the further we go along. Okay, and then I'm going to draw the big shape that the eyebrow takes up. So I'm looking for just the empty shapes. I'm not adding anything to them yet. And then there's this shape underneath the eye, and I'm intentionally focusing on the shapes around the eye and not the eye itself, because I really want us to hone in on all these other shapes that are just as important. And now I'm on the top lid, but again, I'm looking for the shape of shadow in that top lid. And you can see that a little better, how it lumps together into one shape on the black and white version. And if it helps to think about it in terms of that value scale from 0 to 10, I'm outlining all of the like 7, 8, and 9 shadows, just the darker shadows that I'm seeing. And I wouldn't worry about proportions being exact or capturing the likeness in this eye. Right now, we're just looking for these value shapes. These value shapes are telling us everything we need to know. The light tells us everything we need to know. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and put the reflective light shapes that I'm seeing in the reflection of the eye. This is a photograph. This first one is of a model that I took some photos of a while back for this Michael series to do some figure drawing classes that we had last year. His name is Demetrius, and yeah, I just went back and found one of those photos from the photo shoot and zoomed in and cropped his eyes, and then the other two are my daughter. One is inside, kind of close up indoors, and the other one is outside. So she's got some different dilated eyes depending on the sunlight that was in her eyes that day. Okay, so now we've got the empty value shapes here. Oh my goodness. I was trying to adjust my light and it just fell on me. That's as good as that's gonna get, y'all. It'll get darker as I add more to it, I promise. Okay, let me just go ahead and maybe make some of these lines a little darker so they will show up better on the zoom. Also, it helps sometimes to call these organic shapes something other than what they are. Like instead of calling that a top eyelid, we could say it's like a horn. It kind of has the shape of a horn is what I just drew right there. Or maybe a little pencil eraser off the end of it, a slanted one. And then this feels like a path, like a sidewalk path wrapping around right here. And then we've got kind of a soft triangle shape. And then for the iris, we've got an eclipsed circle there that's missing part of it. And we're just looking for the shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light. And I know that doesn't always come easily when we're first drawing something, especially when we're drawing something like an eye that's got so much psychology behind it and so many symbolism that it's hard to get away from. And I'm going to talk more about that as we go further into this. Okay, so now I want to look for those contours. So if we're thinking about that sphere, how we made that sphere look rounded, well, we have something very rounded right here. So I'm going to start on this portion of the, where the eyebrow comes forward on the skull, and think about just how on the skull, how the eyebrow comes forward and it's flat up here, but underneath that we've got a curve. So we're looking for a curved line, but remember how we talked about how depending on your perspective, looking at something that's curved like that cylinder, there might be an equator line where the curve switches and goes a different direction. So right here, the curve switches and it goes a different direction. So it almost feels a little flat right here. And then the curve actually starts to like curve a little in more right here. So as if we kind of start on this end and then come around, we can see how that curve shifts. So, and you can see that if you look, it's hard to see because we maybe are thinking about this as a flat thing and we're trying to force hard outlines around it, but there is a dip and a curve. The elevation curves in right there. It goes, the elevation is higher on the nose and on the eyebrow, and then we've got a recess. It's like a cave or a, you know, a fold in fabric, but only we're looking at the surface of a face and skin, but there's a curve right there. So we're looking for a curved line. And then on the axis, the more horizontal axis, we're just following that same curve of the lines that we already drew for the eyelid, etc. So we've got a curve in that direction. And then right here, this curve kind of continues, but then it becomes more flat. So we've got these vertical lines that start to curve, you know, because they're curving from underneath the eyebrow, and then they're a little more flat on the surface of the forehead. So we're not worried about the lines of the eyebrow hairs here. We're talking about the planes of the face, the elevational curves of the face. And then over here, again, we've got kind of a curve that then becomes flat. And then right here, we start to curve again, but we're curving over and up across the surface of the bridge of the nose. But the nose is next month. We're going to talk about the planes of the face with the nose in July. So we're just sticking with the eye here. So we're not going too far into the bridge of the nose, but obviously it's all connected. And so these planes are pretty flat across the surface, or they're kind of following the curve of the eyebrow. Over here, they do start to curve down across the edge of the face, because then we've got, you know, this edge of the face where another recess is happening, right? This isn't completely flat. It's curving around to the side of the ear, etc. So we've got another curve right here, this curve down. But again, we're not going to worry about that, where it goes after that, because we're just focusing on the eye here. But we could continue the curve from like the crease of the eye, and we could see how that's going out in this direction. A lot of times we get what we call crow's feet, right, around the edges of the eyes, where those creases become more apparent as we get older. And they're just, you know, they're creasing along with the contours of the face there. All right, and then for this space between where the eyelashes are and that little ridge that curves up to the forehead, we've got another little curve, but it's kind of curving forward, right? Because it's covering the eyeball, which is a sphere. So it's curved around the surface of the eyeball that we can't see there. And it's a little more recessed than this ridge above it. But we've got that same axis that's going to follow the curvature of the eyelid, etc. Okay, and then when it comes to the eye itself, we've got exactly a sphere, which we drew on the other paper. But we're looking, like when I took this photograph of Demetrius, and we'll see the same thing with the photos of my daughter, I was standing in front of them. So the perspective of the viewer, which was me, was right in front. So we've got a bit of a straight line across the center there, and then another cross across the center here, but it curves down in this direction. And then we're going to have a curve out to the left and a curve out to the right. And that lines up when we get to the edge of the iris, right? We've got the curve of the iris that is following the curvature of the eyeball, which is a sphere. And then across the top here, same thing. There's a little bit of an equator line where it appears almost straight if we're just talking about those planes and the contours, and then it curves down below that equator line, because my eye level was right in the center of Demetrius's eye there. And then also, yeah, we're viewing a sphere head on. So we've got something like that. Okay, and then these contours should be pretty easy to see now, hopefully, because they're following the same curvature as that value shape crease. The value is following these planes of the face. So that's why understanding the planes of the face are so important, is if you have an understanding of value, but you don't have an understanding of the planes of the face, then you still might end up drawing something that feels flat. So the more you pay attention to these planes, the more you start to realize that the value shapes are following these elevational shifts and curves. And it's a very complex area that we're looking at here on the eye. We've got a lot of shifts between the planes that we're looking at. We've got a convex area, then we've got a concave area, then we have another convex area, then another concave area. You know, there's all kinds of dips and curves happening there in that recess of the eye. So I know that seemed complicated, but the more you start to notice that all you have to do is pay attention to, you know, am I looking at something that's spherical? Am I looking at something that's more cylindrical? Am I looking at something that's more organic, but it's rounded? where do those shifts and, dips and curves occur across those elevations, across those planes. All right, I know that was a lot, but we're gonna do it again with our third eye, but with this next eye, we're gonna try taking the training wheels off for a second and doing this, but just looking at the value, but still keeping this in mind. Okay, so I'm gonna shift up on my paper and I'm gonna take just or actually before I do that, let me go back in on this one and just, because I did this in the other one, I kind of emphasized some of the darker value areas a little bit here. So let's do that a little bit here. Like let's go in and let's add some darker values where we see them. So like maybe go ahead and press down a little more and add the eyelashes. We could go in and maybe fill in the pupil and the iris. I mean, we're going to do more of this in the last drawing as well, but if this helps to start to fill in some of those things, you start to see the eye coming across or putting the eyebrow hairs in, that might be a little helpful for you. All right, now we'll go ahead and move on to this next eye, and we're just going to be looking at the value for this one. So just using my charcoal pencil, and I'm starting out super light on the surface of the paper. Like let's all just take our pencil over here to the side, or maybe on a piece of scratch paper if you don't want to do it on the same paper as your more completed drawings, and just use just the side of the charcoal for a second. Don't press down on it, put very little pressure on it, and then try to erase that. It should come completely off as long as you're not pressing down super hard on the pencil and you're just using the side of the pencil. Think about the movement coming from your arm. That really helps. Okay, so here's where I want to talk more about those symbols of the eye. I'm going to go back to my scratch paper here for just a second, actually. So there's a great book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. I'm just going to go ahead and write that down here. Drawing on the right side of the brain. By Betty Edwards. And this book has a lot of exercises in it that all try to get you to just get out of your more logical thinking side of your brain and get more into the automatic visual side of the brain, which is just drawing what you see and not what you think you see. And it's really challenging when it comes to imagery that we're all super familiar with, like an eye of a face. I actually just go to a different blank page here. Because as we're growing from childhood, a lot of us learn symbols for things like this is the symbol of a house, right? And this is the symbol for a tree. And this is a symbol for the sun in the little corner of the page, right? And then we've got the symbol for a person, which is like a little stick figure, right? And then maybe we have a little emoji smiley face. All right. And then as we get a little older, we still cling to these symbols when we're drawing facial features. So an eye is like that hard almond shape. And a nose, you know, like I did before when I drew just like the little symbol of the eye. We've got this something like that. And then the nose is maybe something like this, right? Hard lines are like that. And then the lips are again really hard lines. Hopefully throughout these next the next few months, as because in July I'm going to focus on noses, and August we're going to do lips, and I'm going to be looking at the planes of the face for all of these classes. And hopefully we're going to get away from this because this is a symbol. And if you're still clinging to this symbol, then you're doing what Betty Edwards is talking about, where you're drawing more what you think about and not what you see. You're looking more for like the visual reference that you have in your brain for eyes and not what the eye is actually doing. Because as we just saw, the eye is a very complex concave and convex surface, right? And then I like to say if there was like a shape for an eye, instead of calling it the almond shape, because yeah, we do see, like when we look at my daughter's eye, for example, I am seeing something that, yeah, if I were to like force a symbol on it, I could see that almond shape. But I like to say, if you're gonna force a shape onto it, let's do the whiteout tape dispenser shape. That shape. Because what that shape does is two things. It accounts for, and not every eye, you know, everybody's eye is different. Like there is no perfectly proportioned eye, there's no perfectly proportioned face, and I've had other classes on facial proportions that you can go back and refer to if you search facial proportions, and on the Michaels playlist. Those were a while back, but those are still referenceable on YouTube. And I didn't go in this much depth on any of the facial features. I just talked about, you know, general facial proportions, but the ways that all of our faces deviate from the general rules are what make us look like us. So there is no such thing as like a standard eye shape, and nobody has symmetrical eyes. And we're only focusing on one of these eyes tonight, but if you were to draw both of them, they're going to be asymmetrical because nobody has eyes that are completely symmetrical and identical. But yeah, if we were to like force a symbol onto it, I would say, you know, the whiteout tape dispensers, if you've seen those, they've got like a little shape like this, and then they kind of dip down, because then we're accounting for that tear duct, and also we're accounting for the roundness over here on this side of the eye, because there actually isn't a corner of the eye that we're seeing over here. There's an implied triangular corner, but that's being implied by the eyelashes. The eyelashes kind of create a fake point. There's not actually a point to the side of the eye. So if when you're drawing eyes, you do this and you force a corner on both sides, right away, I can tell you that you're not looking at that person's eye, because it actually is, it's a soft, there's no corner there, right? We're seeing a roundness where we're seeing the edge of the eye, and then we see the eyelid kind of wraps around it right there, but the eyelashes stick out and they kind of create a false little triangle. And then over here, we've got this, and it's maybe not dipped down so much like that, but you've got the tear duct that we're seeing over here. And then we've still got a soft edge to where the eyeball becomes less visible. Okay, so, and then, yeah, when it comes to the value scale, we don't need a hard line right here because it's going to be nice and soft. And I kind of forced that shape right there because I was just talking about the whiteout tape dispenser. Okay, so we want to get away from those hard lines. We want to get away from all of the like if I were to put a hard 10 value line all the way around, that's telling you that it gets that dark at the bottom of the eyelid, but it doesn't, right? It's more of like a 2 here. Okay, so we're going in nice and soft, nice and light, and we're just looking at those value shapes again. So if you can let go of those symbols completely and just draw what you see, and the Betty Edwards book has a lot of exercises in there that can help just train you to look more at what you see and not what you think you see. I just realized I need to scooch this down a little bit so I have space for the eyebrow. So see, that's a good example of how if you go in super light, you should be able to erase. So I'm starting with that same shape, that same little shadowy shape over here on the side of the eye. I'm looking for the organic value shapes. And I'm just going to go down a little lower so that I leave room for the eyebrow above that. Chanel, are there any questions that are jumping out that I should address?
There hasn't been a lot of questions about the drawing itself.
Okay.
The last question we had is if you can place the photo within the frame of the Zoom.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I'm not gonna do that just because it messes with the how the image shows up. I feel like it messes with the light a little too much, but you all have the reference photo. You should be able to pull that up in front of you. I mean, I can do it, but I feel like it'll might make it harder to see my drawing, and it's hard to get all of it on the screen at the same time and my whole drawing on the screen. So I'm going to stick with just my drawing being visible. I'm starting with that those same shapes over there in the corner in the recess between the at the edge of the nose and where the recess starts there. And again, we're not worried about perfect likeness here. We're just trying to make it look like a realistic eye. So I wouldn't worry about proportions being exact. Okay, so I haven't even made it to the line for the tear duct yet. So now I'm looking at that little shape, the tear duct.
Adrian, we do have a question now.
Oh, okay.
Is it better or worse to break down your drawings into basic shapes?
Whatever helps you. If it helps you to like draw a big circle for the eye socket first and then build on that, then yeah, definitely. And we can do that with the next one if because we're going to be combining the contour lines with the value with the next one. So I can definitely do the next one that way. I just wanted to have one where we're just looking at the value and then we're going to combine the value and the contours in the last one here. And yeah, definitely that is helpful. That's a good policy. I'm not really worried about perfect proportions here. I'm more concerned about these value shapes. And I find that that's a great way to approach drawing an eye or really honestly anything, because if you expect yourself to be perfect the first time, that puts a lot of unnecessary pressure on you. And you know, adjustments can be made if you're drawing super light. So I'm keeping my lines really light right here because it maybe doesn't even need to get that dark. I just want y'all to be able to see the lines that I'm drawing. It's always a hard line to toe here when I'm teaching on Zoom because that line almost doesn't need to be there at all. But I drew it so that y'all could see where I was in the process there. Because that is just such a light area right there that I really don't want to have a hard line. Okay, and then getting just like the basic shape of the eyebrow in here. So this is the sketch where I wanted us to just focus on value and blending with our blending stumps and this charcoal, etc. So I want to go ahead and early on put in that shape for the reflective light that I'm seeing, and those reflective, all of these shapes are following those contours. They're all following the planes of the face and those curves. So as I put in the reflective light or the lighter part that I'm seeing of the iris, I want to make sure that that's curving around the 3 dimensions of the planes of the eye. Okay, and then now, and you could have done this with, maybe I should have done that with my hard or my medium charcoal pencil and then switched to the soft, but I was doing that with the soft the whole time. And then now I'm going to start to put in some of the value. The darkest place that I'm seeing is over there where we started in the recess here. And I want to make sure I'm following those 3-dimensional planes. So I'm curving my value with the curves as I'm seeing them there. And I'm pressing down a little harder where I see that it gets darker. And the beauty of charcoal is that it's so, it's nice and messy and it kind of gets everywhere, but you can switch to one of these blending stumps and you can almost like draw with the blending stump. So we can get a lot of these softer lines, like these lighter lines in here. Maybe I'm just drawing that with the blending stump to start so that you don't have to go too dark. You can kind of feel it out. You can take what you drew in those dark areas and spread it around using the blending stump. Like, let's go ahead and go everywhere we're seeing a 10 on the value scale. So absolute black, definitely here in the pupil. And along the edge of the iris. And next week, we'll talk about how the shift and change in these shapes can affect the expressiveness of the eye. Definitely, if you were to go a little wider here with your iris, then it makes the person feel like they're kind of shocked or wide awake, right? So the more we eclipse this with these shadows, the more the expression on the face can feel a little less intense like that. And then I'm looking at the eyelashes. I'm looking at the directional curve of the eyelashes as I'm putting those in. So really just filling in that whole area where it gets super dark, but making sure that I'm following that directional curve, how the eyelashes curve out and under right there. Okay, but since we drew so dark in those spots, I can blend that in with my blending stump, and then I can take the blending stump now that it's nice and dark with all that charcoal on it, and I can get these softer areas to happen just drawing with the blending stump with the charcoal that got transferred there. So that's how we can.
I have a couple questions for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so in regards to supplies, the only thing that you're using that might be different from the supply list is you're using Artist Loft charcoal pencils, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then the other question, hold on one second, let me go back to it. I've not worked with a blending stump before. Can you explain the purpose for it, please and thank you?
Yeah, of course. So they're just a way to blend in. You could use a tissue or a piece, or you could use a Q-tip, anything. Some people use their fingers. I try not to use my fingers too much just because our fingers have oils in them that can transfer to the paper and can, be distracting in your drawing. But it's just a way of getting the value to be soft and blended together. And it's just a tool that comes, they're just paper tubes that have a sharpened side that look like a pencil. They're called Tortillons or blending stumps. And yeah, they're just used to blend. Once you get them dirty with charcoal, you probably only want to use them for charcoal. Sometimes I'll keep some of them, like this one I used with the different colors for the nose drawing that we're doing next month. So I'll probably only use colors on this one. That way it doesn't get black on it, and then I don't, won't be able to use it with those colors anymore. So it's just a tool for blending. And the nice thing about it, since the charcoal is so dark and messy, is that I can be really soft and I can just apply my value with the blending stump only, and that's how I can get that really light value to happen. Because it can be really challenging to get those like 2 and 3 on the value scale, that really soft value to happen. So I can do it that way. And the big one might actually be a little easier than that smaller one there because it'll spread it around nice and soft um, without those little like streaks that were coming into it from the smaller blending stump. But yeah, the thing that I wanted to illustrate the most with this is how the value is varied. It's not, we don't need a hard black line around all of this. In fact, we need a very soft line around a lot of this value because it just doesn't get that dark all the way around. And when you do those hard lines around everything, what you're telling the viewer is that every surface of this form is, you know, is a solid 10 black shadow. And if it's not, then you want to represent those lighter values where you're seeing them, and that's going to help us see the depths of that form and the 3 dimensions of that form even more. It's just going to make more sense. And if all of this stuff is like complicated, then that just tells you that you need some more practice with it, that you need to maybe check out some other tutorials and maybe watch this video a few times and draw along with me a few times. It's not a bad thing to be in a place where we need more practice. I have been trying to learn the guitar for many years, and every time I put it down and then come back to it, I have to start right back over learning just the muscle memory of holding the guitar. And there's, a few logistical things that I remember about how to play a chord, but the practice of it is something I have to be doing a lot for it to come naturally. So it's nothing, no shame in needing practice.
I have a few more questions for you.
Okay, yes.
Susan, who actually asked the last question about what the purpose of a blending stump is, said that was helpful. Thanks a bunch. You're doing a beautiful job.
Oh, thank you.
And then the questions are, can you use both graphite and charcoal together in the same drawing?
Yeah, definitely. You can combine any materials that you want.
And then the other question is, can you sharpen a blending stump?
No, but you can, if you just like rub it on a surface, you can sometimes get like the excess off. Like if I were to take my scratch paper over here, I could like scribble with it a whole bunch to try to get all of that charcoal that's now collected on it off. And I might be able to get it back to where it's sort of clean, but it's never going to be 100% clean again. So once it gets stained with some some charcoal, then you know, you just use that one for charcoal. Like I wouldn't use the same blending stump for graphite and go back and forth between the two of them unless I were to try to clean it off like this. But they're very inexpensive and you can, you know, get a package of a lot of them for very, very cheap and then, you know, replace them as needed. But no, you cannot sharpen them, unfortunately. All right, so let's see how we doing on time. Oh, it's just now 7 o'clock. Yeah, we got plenty of time to do that third eye. All right, so I'm just building up my value where I want my darker values to go. And I'm following the elevational curve. So like in the eyebrow here, I'm following the elevation of the eyebrow. And then if I want it to just be like this, then I don't have to blend it with the blending stump. If I feel like I've achieved the amount of blending that I need in a certain area, like with the eyebrows, I don't want that to be too soft and blended because the eyebrow hairs look like that. They have that texture of what I'm doing right now with the charcoal pencil. So I don't necessarily need to blend everything. I'm really only doing that where I want that softer value to be. But maybe there are a few places like right here at the edge where I do want to soften the eyebrow hairs a little bit. So I'll do that. But for the like majority of it, or maybe I could do a little bit of that. But it's easy to get carried away sometime with the blending stump and like over blend. And I usually stray like it's just a personal preference, but with graphite, I don't like to use the blending stumps too much, but they are very helpful with charcoal. They're helpful with graphite too, but like I said, I like to rely more on my uh, building up of my values with the different graphite pencils. And I don't like to use the blending stumps too much with graphite because I feel like I end up over blending. I have a hard time knowing when to stop. Sometimes you don't know where to stop until you went too far. So anyway, okay. And yeah, that seems to happen a lot more when I'm blending with a graphite. When I'm using a blending stump with graphite, it's always like, oh, I had such a lovely thing going and then I over blended it. But it's hard to control for some reason with graphite. For me, again, that's just a personal preference. So now I'm just building up those shadows underneath the eye.
I have another question for you really
Oh,
quick.
yeah.
Would gridding an isolated eye help clear focus the values?
Possibly, yeah. If that helps you to see them, then yeah, I would say use any tool that you have at your disposal, and using a grid is very helpful way to see things that you could be missing. So see, I'm really using the blending stump for a lot of these softer areas. I'm not even using the charcoal pencil first. I'm just pulling from the darker part of the iris that I already blended in, and then I'm just using that to draw with, so I can keep it nice and soft. So I'm really only using the charcoal pencil where I need it to go darker than like a 5 or a 6 on that value scale. You could even have a separate piece of paper where you like, let me take a separate piece of paper here and just like scribble with my dark charcoal and then go into that. Like I have another blending stump over here that's already nice and dirty that I could be using instead of messing up that new one. And then I can take my blending stump and do that. And then now I've got some charcoal on there that I can use to draw with. So that's one way to keep that value nice and soft. And then notice how in the whites of the eyes, the quote unquote whites of the eyes, it's actually pretty dark in a lot of places. So I got it pretty dark right here. And all of that value that I'm putting in, I'm following those three-dimensional curves that we've talked about. And then if I went a little too far, I can just take my eraser and blot into that a little bit. Use my eraser to draw with and pull things out in a way that illustrate what's happening with the value. All right, I think we're ready to move on to this third one. The last thing I wanted to add here before I do though is just a few of my daughter's freckles because it just really rounded that out nicely. Although maybe I could use the blending stump to do that instead. Oh, and then I didn't put the eyelashes in on the bottom lid. So I've got all that really soft value there. And then now I can do just the way the eyelashes actually appear, which I'm just seeing a few of them jumping out in the photograph. And so when you have that, instead of having that hard line all the way around, that starts to feel so much more realistic and representational that way, right? And we just have that dark black line for the eyelashes as opposed to everything being dark black. It really starts to feel more realistic that way. All right, let's move on to this third eye. I think I'm just going to go to the next page because my ring light is in the way of me scooching up too much here. We still have 20 minutes for this last eye. And so we're going to combine the two things we've done tonight. We're going to start out by sketching the planes of the face. And I'm going to use this purple again. Hopefully that'll show up somewhat. And then I'm going to go over it with the dark value. And this is the one where she was outdoors. And so the sunlight was like going probably in her eyes a little bit here. And so the 10 values are kind of minimal. So this one should go pretty fast. It's a lot of softer value on this one. But also the shape of the eye is a lot different because she's squinting. So this will be a good lead in to next week where we talk about more expressive eyes. All right, so again, I'm never try not to start with the main shape of the eye, that symbol of the eye. I try to always start with the shapes around it so that I can hopefully break you of that. So it's really an unlearning. We have to unlearn the way that we have been drawing since childhood, right? And those habits are really hard to break, y'all. It's like if I drive the same way home to my neighborhood for 15 years, but then I move and I live in a different neighborhood and I start to drive home without thinking, I'm probably going to drive to my old neighborhood, right? Because that's so ingrained in my brain. So it's really hard to form new habits and to just go a different way. So you have to actively unlearn this way of drawing by symbols that are in your mind and actually look at what you're looking at. And that's a practice like holding the guitar frets in the right way. It's a lot of conscious, effort that you have to make it first before it becomes unconscious and second nature. So I don't expect any of this to be simple for you. If you're trying to go from drawing an eye like this to, what we're doing tonight. So just be really patient with yourself. And I know that it's really hard. And that's why I wanted to start with those shapes around the eye, because the more we start with those shapes, hopefully the easier it is to not take that same route home, right? Okay, so I've got the shape above the eyelid, the eyebrow. Those are the three shapes that I just drew. And then now I'm drawing the shape of the eye. And it definitely has more of a triangular feel because she's squinting and those eyelashes are coming down over here and creating that triangle on this side even more. So I am starting with the bigger shapes. Somebody was asking about starting with the bigger shapes. I am starting with the bigger shapes. And maybe to be even more broad, you could start with like a whole circle because of the eye socket and then fill that in because we've got, the under eye right here and then the eye above the shape above that. And then the top of the circle would be where your eyebrow is. And I realize my lines are not showing up too much yet. Y'all just be patient with me. I'm gonna start to put these contours in now and hopefully it'll show up a little more. But I gotta take my time so I can look at what these contours are doing. So I'm seeing this big area right here. Since she's squinting, I can see, this big flat shape, but it's not flat. It curves a little bit up into where the eyebrows are. But I don't want to draw too dark because I want to go over this with the charcoal and keep it all nice and soft. So hopefully my lines are showing up enough for you to see what I'm doing here. It's just like how we started with that first eye, just looking at those contour lines and the planes of the face. So now on the on the horizontal axis, it's also curving in that same direction as the eyelid and under the eyebrow there. And then we've got these lines. If it were possible for my 10-year-old daughter to have crow's feet, we might see those lines on the side of the eye there, just describing what the elevation is doing. And then the space between the, just the top lid, we've got another curve like this. And the curve does switch and go the opposite direction. So somewhere in the middle, it's a little more straight. And then it curves out in the opposite direction. And then under the eyelids, we've got what I described as like a sidewalk path earlier. And again, those would probably show up more as wrinkles if she were older. But we're just illustrating what the planes of the face are doing. So we're just putting them in just as a guide for where all this value is going to go on top. And maybe when I'm finished, I will darken all this up a little bit so that it shows up even more. But I'm going to go ahead and put fill in the iris. Maybe a little more squinty than this, but that's good enough. We've got that reflective light. But then again, we're looking at that, at the contours. So I've got that cross down the center, and then it's a downward curve below that. It's an upward curve above that. To the left and to the right, it curves out. We're just noticing all of those contours. And then on the eyelashes themselves, they're curving in the same direction as the eyelashes. And then these kind of have more of a scoopy feeling to them. All right, so now I'm going to start putting my value on top of that. Using my soft charcoal and my blending stumps again. And if it helps to use the inverted light photos, I kind of abandoned those inverted light photos, but those are definitely good to refer back to for drawing those value shapes. Like it's much easier to see that shape, that organic shape and that shape, etc., when you look at the inverted one. And same thing with these. Like this may really help you to see these value shapes that I'm talking about when it's reversed like that. They stand out so much more. Okay, so yeah, I just saw somebody say, can we skip to the next one? We're on the last one. We're on the bottom eye, the third eye that we are drawing. We're on the last one. Okay, so I'm starting with my 10 values. I like to start with the darker values and then work my way out to the light. It might be because I think it's easier to start out with full pressure and then work my way to the lighter pressure, let up on the pressure. But if you think it's easier to start with the darker pressure and then, or sorry, start with the lighter pressure and then get darker as you go, then you do that. You do whatever works best for you. I love to tell my students that making art is like dating yourself, because when you first start dating someone, you don't know what their preferences are. You don't know what their favorite music is, their favorite food is, etc. You have to date them for a while to get to know them before you know. And whenever people, come to a painting class or a drawing class and they are like somebody was asking earlier, what about this blending stump? And I said, I don't like using blending stumps with graphite, but that's a preference. Some people love using blending stumps with graphite, but you have to make a little art first. You got to practice and figure out what your preferences are. You're dating yourself. I can't tell you what your preferences are. I can only tell you what mine are. All right, so once I've gone dark in that area, I'm using my blending stump to kind of pull from that and go into the lighter areas like I did before. And I'm just drawing on top of these contours. So doing the same thing that we did before, but I've just got kind of training wheels underneath now. I'm using very light pressure, and then I'll use my blending stump to blend all this in, although it is pretty light. Oh, I guess one thing I did differently in the other example here, I kind of used the purple a little bit to play around with the values. So maybe I'll do that a little bit here as well. So I kind of colored in her eye with the purple chalk pastel and the violet. Oh wait, that's the wrong violet. It was this heliotrope is what it's called. It's like a red violet Or, yeah. So anyway, that just kind of gave it a different dimensional feel to blend out with that color instead. Let me zip it along here because we're running out of time. Got 9 minutes left, and I'd love to see some of y'all's examples at the end of the class here, but this one definitely is pretty minimal since there's so much light in it. There's not as many shadows. But the shadows that are there are still following those three-dimensional curves. One thing about pressing down a little harder on my pencil to make sure my lines were showing up on the screen is now it's kind of hard to draw over them with the charcoal. It's because it kind of created more of a resist for me. So that's one aspect of combining these tools that might be an issue for you if you pressed down a little harder like I did. I probably went much lighter in my other example. All right, I think I'm going to switch to my other example real quick, just to the sake of moving on here. So yeah, just keep blending and softening in those lighter values. That is basically it, y'all. So I'm going to switch back to my forward-facing camera here, and I'd love to see some of y'all's examples from the class if you want to hold them up, or if there's any questions. If I could go back, we still have 7 minutes here, so I could go back and clarify anything. Right, this is Barbara's example. Oh, that's gorgeous, Barbara. Yeah, those are so soft. Those values are so soft, especially on your charcoal one there in the middle. I can just feel that glistening in the reflective light of the eye. That's beautiful. This is Autumn. Oh, that's gorgeous too, Autumn. Yeah, that's really great. You can really see the distinction between all three of, like, you're capturing some likeness in all of those so far. This is Pam. Oh, it got a little blurry in your background. Yeah, that's great. Those are gorgeous. I love the one that you combined the planes of the face with the charcoal. That's some really nice blending happening there. All right. Yeah, oh, that one. This is Kiara. I love the one with the contours there on the bottom. Just the planes of the face. That one turned out really nice. All of those are really lovely. This is Tanisha. Wow. Yeah, those are really popping off the page. That is gorgeous. I love how big you went too. That is just beautiful work. Heck yeah. This is Colleen. Those are gorgeous as well. Wow, y'all made me so proud. I love these. Yeah, the softness that's coming across in all of y'all's blending is really nice. Oh my gosh, this is Michelle or Kayla maybe. Oh, I love the one, So one of my daughter's squinty eye that really looks like her eye. You captured some good likeness on that one for sure. And the middle one, all of them. So impressive. Let's see who else. Goodwin. Oh, that's lovely too. Wow, I am just so impressed with all of these examples. I can see an evolution happening there in your sketches too. Like from where you started to that last one, I really just feel like you're getting that the planes of the face and the contours. It's just coming across more and more. It just feels so much more three-dimensional in that middle one especially. Yeah, lovely work. All right, Mrs. Renee. Yeah, I'm definitely feeling that curvature of the three dimensions around there, around the outside of the eye. This is Esma. Beautiful work. Yeah, I see those contour lines up there on that top one. Impressive. And Abira, that's lovely. Oh, I love the green. Yeah, that one on the top left, right by your finger, that one's really feeling three-dimensional. Very nice. That is so nice. Yes, I love how you've got so many different layers going in the iris. It feels really rounded around the pupil there. All right, we had a larger class tonight, so lots of people sharing. I'm glad I stopped a little earlier. This is Andrew. Yeah, wow, that's really, really nice and soft. Let's see the next one. Okay, yeah. This is such wonderful work. Oh my goodness. Diana. Wow, you're blowing me away with those. Wow, that one there in the center just looks so realistic. You nailed it. Please, if you share that on Instagram, tag me or send that to me. I'd love to have a copy of that example. All right, Lizette, we got you spotlighted. Let's see. Oh, those are beautiful too. Wow. Oh my gosh, you really captured an emotion in that one. Next week is the expressive eyes one, but those, you captured some expressive eyes there. I feel like you captured my daughter's kind of subdued emotion there. Yes, those are gorgeous too, Cecilia. Oh my gosh, I am just so blown away. This is Ronald. Wow, yeah, very nice, Ronald. I love how you really went darker with your contours, but I feel the planes of the face, like I can tell you got it down. That looks amazing. I really feel that like the eyelid coming forward and then the recess next to the eyelid. It's all coming across really strong. And that's another gorgeous example too. Look at that soft iris around that pupil. That is so lovely. And those are another great example. Man, y'all all have such amazing examples. I hope some of you post and tag me, because I'd love to see them again later. That's just beautiful. Wow, look at those. That's also gorgeous. I love how you blended the purple and then the charcoal one is just so nice and soft. There's such a huge difference between when you've got those dark values and then that soft value underneath on the bottom lid, that really soft line where it just disappears just That's so beautiful. All right, we got another example here. Very nice. Yeah. Nice blending on that last one. All right, we are going a little overtime here now, but wow, I don't think that may be a record for how many people shared their drawings at the end of a class. That was so fun. Thank y'all so much for joining me. And yeah, next week will be expressive eyes using pen and ink, and I provided different reference photos. Those are all going to be photos of my son and he loves making dramatic faces. So we'll have some very expressive eyes to work with next week. And we'll be using the same method, but then we'll be applying pen and ink on top of it. So using illustration pens. Thank you all so much, and hopefully I'll see you next week for that class. Thank you, Chanel. Y'all all have a wonderful night.